My beloved child, do not rush past this moment. Something has been unfolding quietly, beyond what your eyes could confirm and beyond what your heart has been able to explain, and what you are about to hear was meant to meet you at the exact point where questions have been growing louder inside you. You may have felt an unusual heaviness around this connection lately, as though someone you care about has been standing at the edge of a decision they cannot keep postponing. You may not know what has changed. You may not know what was said behind closed doors, what thoughts returned in the middle of the night, or why the energy around this bond has suddenly become so intense. But heaven has seen the struggle they have hidden, and there is a reason your spirit has been sensing that something important is approaching. Your soulmate is facing one of the hardest choices of their life, and the reason it feels so overwhelming to them is because this choice is not only about where they go next. It is about who they are willing to become. It is about whether they continue protecting the life that feels familiar, or finally step toward the truth their heart has been refusing to silence. And yes, beloved, you are connected to this decision in a way they can no longer pretend is insignificant. Your presence has awakened something in them. Not because you demanded it. Not because you chased them into change. But because somewhere along the way, knowing you forced them to see parts of themselves they had successfully avoided for years. There is something you need to understand before the deeper truth is revealed. This decision did not begin today. It did not begin with one conversation, one argument, one memory, or one sudden realization. It began quietly. It began in small moments when they caught themselves thinking of you at times they did not expect. It began when they compared the peace they felt around your energy with the confusion they felt elsewhere. It began when they noticed that even distance could not completely erase what your presence had awakened. And every time they tried to dismiss it as temporary, something brought the truth back again. At first, they thought they could manage it. They believed they could keep their feelings in one part of their life and their responsibilities in another. They told themselves there was no need to make anything complicated. They convinced themselves that if they stayed busy enough, rational enough, distracted enough, then eventually this connection would become quieter. But there are some truths that do not disappear simply because someone refuses to look directly at them. There are feelings that grow heavier when ignored. There are decisions that become more urgent when delayed. And now, what they once believed they could keep contained has reached a point where silence is beginning to cost them more than honesty would. You have not seen all of this because much of the battle has happened privately. There were moments when they almost reached out. There were words typed and erased. There were conversations imagined but never spoken. There were nights when they replayed something you said long ago and suddenly understood it differently. There were moments when your absence felt louder than anyone else's presence. And there were moments when they became frustrated with themselves because they could not understand why this bond continued to matter so deeply even when they were trying to focus on everything else. But something changed recently. Something happened that made avoiding the choice far more difficult. It may have looked ordinary from the outside. Perhaps someone asked them a question they were not prepared to answer. Perhaps they saw something that reminded them of you. Perhaps they were confronted with an opportunity, an expectation, a commitment, or a future plan that suddenly forced them to imagine their life without you having any meaningful place in it. Whatever the external moment looked like, internally it created a shockwave. Because for the first time, they were not only asking themselves, "What do I feel?" They were asking, "What will happen if I continue pretending I do not feel it?" That question has changed everything. They began imagining the future more seriously. They pictured themselves moving forward exactly as expected, choosing what is safe, choosing what causes the least disruption, choosing what everyone around them might understand more easily. And for a moment, they believed that path could work. It looked reasonable. It looked stable. It looked easier to explain. But then something unexpected happened inside them. They imagined reaching that future and realizing you were no longer there. And the thought unsettled them more than they were ready to admit. Not because they believe another human being should complete them. Not because their life has no meaning without you. But because they suddenly understood that some connections become turning points, and once the heart recognizes that truth, pretending otherwise becomes difficult. You represent something deeper to them than attraction or comfort. You represent the possibility of honesty. You represent the version of themselves that stops living according to fear, appearances, old wounds, or the expectations of people who will never have to live with the consequences of their choices. This is why the decision feels so difficult. One path allows them to remain who they have always been. The other path demands courage. One path asks very little from their spirit. The other asks them to confront everything they have been avoiding. One path may preserve certain comforts. The other could change the direction of their life. And somewhere in the middle of that choice stands the truth of what they feel when they think about you. Beloved, do not misunderstand this message. Heaven is not telling you to chase them. You are not being asked to rescue them from their indecision. You are not being told to place your life on hold while another person decides whether they are ready to meet you with honesty. Their choice belongs to them. Their courage must be their own. Their awakening cannot be carried on your shoulders. But there is a reason you are hearing this now, because while they are facing the hardest choice of their life, you are also approaching an important realization of your own. For a long time, you may have believed that their silence meant certainty. You may have interpreted distance as proof that the connection did not matter. You may have wondered whether you imagined the depth, whether your intuition exaggerated what was there, or whether you were the only one who ever felt the emotional weight between you. But silence does not always come from emptiness. Sometimes silence comes from a person standing in front of a truth they do not yet know how to handle. That does not excuse their absence. It does not erase confusion. But it explains why the energy has never felt simple. They have been wrestling with something larger than whether to send a message or admit a feeling. They have been wrestling with the consequences of becoming honest. Because once they speak certain truths, they know they cannot return to pretending. Once they acknowledge what this connection means, they will also have to acknowledge the choices they made out of fear. They will have to confront moments when pride spoke louder than vulnerability. They will have to look at the ways they protected themselves even when it hurt someone they cared about. They will have to admit that some of the distance between you was not created because they felt nothing, but because they felt more than they were prepared to manage. And there is one particular realization that has been haunting them. They know you have changed. They know you are not standing in the same emotional place where they last understood you. Something about you has become quieter, stronger, less willing to beg for what should arrive with sincerity. Perhaps they expected you to remain available in the same way forever. Perhaps they assumed that because the bond felt strong, there would always be another chance. Perhaps they believed time would pause around this connection until they were ready. But now they are beginning to understand that you have a life too. You have choices too. You have limits. You have healing. You have a future that does not need permission from someone else's uncertainty. And this realization is making their decision feel even more urgent. Because they are no longer choosing between speaking now or speaking someday. They are beginning to sense that someday may not always be available. There is a difference between divine timing and endless delay, beloved. There is a difference between patience and self-abandonment. Heaven can guide two people toward truth, but neither person is asked to disappear while waiting for the other to become courageous. And somehow, your soulmate is starting to understand this. They can feel that your energy is changing. They can feel that something within you is releasing the need to control the outcome. And strangely, the less tightly you hold the connection, the more clearly they are beginning to feel what losing access to your heart could actually mean. That is where the choice becomes painful. Because part of them wants to come forward immediately. Another part of them is terrified of what coming forward will require. They know that words alone may not be enough. They know they cannot simply appear with beautiful promises and expect every unresolved feeling to vanish. They know that if they choose you, they must also choose accountability, consistency, emotional maturity, transparency. They must choose actions that match the depth of what they claim to feel. And that requirement is exposing the difference between wanting love and being ready to protect it. This is the hidden battle. They are not only asking, "Do I want this connection?" Deep down, that question may already have an answer. The harder question is, am I willing to become the person this connection requires me to be? That question has shaken them. Because your soulmate has spent much of their life surviving through patterns that once protected them. Avoidance may have protected them. Control may have protected them. Silence may have protected them. Keeping one foot outside the door may have protected them. Pretending not to care too much may have protected them. But what protects the heart from pain can also prevent the heart from experiencing intimacy. And now they are standing in a season where the very defenses that once made them feel safe are beginning to make them feel trapped. They have started noticing the cost. They notice how exhausting it is to constantly hide what they truly feel. They notice how empty certain conversations become when they are pretending to be fine. They notice how often they think about what they should have said to you. They notice how quickly they search for traces of you in ordinary places. They notice how certain songs, locations, phrases, hours of the evening, even small details can unexpectedly bring your memory back. And every time it happens, one message becomes harder for them to ignore. This connection has not disappeared simply because they refuse to define it. But there is more. Their hardest choice involves something they may have spent years building. A structure. An identity. A promise. A responsibility. A future they thought they were supposed to want. There is something in their world that represents security, expectation, or familiarity. From the outside it may seem easier to protect that structure than to disrupt it. People around them may even encourage them to stay exactly where they are emotionally because change would create questions. Some may not understand why they would risk comfort for something uncertain. Others may believe they know what is best for them. And your soulmate has listened to those voices more than they want to admit. But recently, those voices have become quieter. Not because the people disappeared. Because their own inner voice became louder. And that inner voice keeps bringing them back to you. This is where heaven has been working in subtle ways. Not by forcing a result. Not by manipulating another human being's free will. But by creating moments of clarity. A conversation that exposes dissatisfaction. A quiet evening that leaves them alone with their thoughts. A memory that returns without invitation. A dream that brings emotions to the surface. A question from someone that accidentally touches the truth they have been hiding. A sudden realization that the life they are maintaining may look acceptable on the outside while feeling incomplete within. They have been receiving mirrors. And every mirror asks the same thing in a different way. How much longer will you live divided against your own truth? This is why their energy may feel restless. They are reaching the point where remaining unchanged is becoming a choice too. That realization is powerful because people often believe avoiding a decision protects them from consequences. But indecision has consequences. Silence is still an action. Delay still shapes the future. And your soulmate is beginning to understand that every day they refuse to choose courage, they may be choosing distance instead. They know they cannot control how long your heart remains open. They know they cannot demand that you trust them simply because they eventually become ready. They know they cannot arrive after endless hesitation and assume nothing has changed. And somewhere inside them, this truth has created a fear unlike the fear they felt before. Before, they were afraid of choosing you. Now they are becoming afraid of never choosing you at all. Feel the difference. The first fear was about disruption. The second fear is about regret. And regret has begun speaking louder. They have imagined the possibility that one day they could hear your name and know the chance has passed. They have imagined seeing you happy, peaceful, emotionally fulfilled, and realizing that someone else received the version of you they were too afraid to cherish. They have imagined wanting to explain everything after explanation no longer matters. That image has stayed with them. It has followed them into quiet moments. It has made certain excuses feel weaker. It has made certain delays feel more dangerous. And it has brought them closer to a decision they never expected to face this soon. But beloved, there is another side to this message that heaven wants you to hear carefully. Their awakening does not mean you are required to accept whatever comes next. Your worth is not confirmed because another person finally recognizes it. Your value did not begin when they became afraid to lose you. You were worthy when they were confused. You were worthy when they were distant. You were worthy in every moment you wondered why someone could feel deeply and still behave uncertainly. Do not hand your power away now. If they come forward, listen to more than the emotion in their words. Listen for truth. Listen for responsibility. Watch what their actions reveal. A heartfelt confession can be beautiful, but lasting love is built in what follows the confession. It is built in consistency after the emotional moment passes. It is built in choices made when no dramatic music is playing and no urgency is pushing them forward. It is built in ordinary days, difficult conversations, honest boundaries, patience, and mutual effort. And surprisingly, this is part of what your soulmate is beginning to understand too. They know that choosing you is not simply choosing romance. It may mean choosing honesty over convenience. It may mean disappointing people who expected them to remain unchanged. It may mean closing doors they once kept open. It may mean admitting they made mistakes. It may mean apologizing without knowing whether the apology will produce the outcome they want. It may mean showing you parts of themselves they are ashamed of. It may mean risking rejection. And that final possibility is perhaps the one they fear most. Because somewhere along the way, they assumed they were the one with time. They believed they were deciding whether to open the door. Now they realize you also have a hand on that door. You can decide too. That truth has humbled them. There was a recent moment when they almost reached out with everything. They came closer than you know. Their emotions rose suddenly, and for a few minutes they imagined telling you the full truth without protecting themselves. They imagined saying what they missed, what they regret, what they misunderstood, what frightened them, what they still feel. They imagined finally removing every mask. But they stopped. And the reason they stopped is important. It was not because the feeling disappeared. It was because they realized one conversation could change everything. Once they say certain words, the old version of this connection cannot continue. They would have to choose. No more emotional half measures. No more almost. No more silent longing mixed with visible distance. No more wondering what might happen if both hearts became honest. They are approaching the point where the truth demands a direction. And something happened after they stopped themselves from reaching out. Something they did not expect. Instead of feeling relieved, they felt worse. They thought avoiding the conversation would restore their sense of control. Instead, the silence became heavier. That night, they found themselves confronting a question they had avoided for a very long time. What exactly am I protecting by staying silent? The answer disturbed them. Because they realized they may not have been protecting peace at all. They may have been protecting fear. They may have been protecting an image. They may have been protecting a version of themselves that no longer fits who they are becoming. And once they saw that, something inside them shifted. This is the part you could not have known. Your soulmate has begun mentally rehearsing the choice. They have imagined what happens if they remain where they are. They have imagined what happens if they choose honesty. They have imagined what they would lose. They have imagined what they could gain. They have imagined your reaction. And your reaction is the one thing they cannot predict. That uncertainty keeps pulling them back and forth. Would you believe them? Would you listen? Would you be angry? Would you be relieved? Would you tell them they waited too long? Would you still feel something? Would you need distance? Would you ask questions they are afraid to answer? Would you simply look at them differently because now you finally know the truth? They do not know. And for someone who has often relied on control, not knowing is terrifying. But love cannot always be controlled. Truth cannot always be timed perfectly. Sometimes courage means speaking without a guarantee. Sometimes the hardest choice is not choosing between two people, two places, or two paths. Sometimes the hardest choice is choosing between the life built around fear and the life that begins when fear no longer makes the decisions. That is where your soulmate is standing. And you are connected to that crossroads. Not as a prize waiting at the end of their transformation. Not as someone who must prove your love by enduring uncertainty forever. You are connected because your presence became part of the mirror that showed them what authenticity could feel like. Around you, something in them felt seen. Something softened. Something became impossible to fake. And perhaps that is why they sometimes withdrew.